content-wise, I think these web components provided via some API are probably the future where things are going.
Today we're talking about integrating WordPress into existing websites.
Yay! What do you mean by that, Stefan?
Sometimes we get asked to build a WordPress website, like a blog, a magazine, and to make it available within another website that exists already and to make it look like it was part of that website, or to add new functionality and stuff like that. So sometimes that could be website.com/blog, but then under /about us, they're using an existing website or CMS already. Or maybe they have a platform that just like is its own app and so on, and they want to use, WordPress as an additional magazine. Most of the times, I think it is blogs and magazines, right?
Yeah, or landing pages.
Or landing pages, right? That also happened before to us. And there are multiple ways how to achieve that. We want to elaborate on those a little bit today.
Yeah, exactly.
Which one comes to your mind first?
What comes to my mind first is probably what we did first, like before, when, like in bigger setups with bigger companies where we had to integrate with an existing site. The client basically provided for us something they called an integrator template. So, and what was the nice thing about that is that with this template, you already had like the basic layout or frame of the website. You had the CSS loaded, the menu loaded, maybe the footer already loaded. And then you had like a piece of HTML, like an HTML comment, where you could inject code, kind of. So this is like the probably the most advanced way of doing things. And this also means that you have to be a bit careful about authoring your website, right? Like the new custom-made one, because this might interfere with existing scripts, existing styles on the website. So but anyways, like this is one way to do things, right?
Yeah. Where was that then hosted? Like, did we host the website ourselves? Did we push the code somewhere? Like, did we pull the integrator template and work with that? Or did we push our changes into that system?
Yeah, well, usually in that case, it's basically we had to do the rendering. So the request hit our server, and we fetched the integrator template from some internal source. And we also in WordPress had to, instead of just rendering the HTML, we got the base basically from the integrator template and then said, okay, we want to inject our content, the HTML, into the places that had these placeholders, right? So that also means that this website needs to be directly accessible by the outside, right? So let's say in the case where you have some like example.com and then /blog. Example.com is an existing website, and /blog is where we serve the website with the integrator template. This basically, the simplest way of doing this is to have a folder on like the server that is /blog, and in this /blog you just have your entire WordPress installation or instance, right? So this is like the most straightforward way. So actually we are talking about like two different things, right? Integrating the content or the markup in some way with these like integrator templates, and then also integrating a request, like having a server structure that actually allows you to seamlessly have URLs like mix and match or mixed between like different backends, right? And the way, or what I explained just now, is like the simplest, most straightforward way. You have a PHP application that is served on the root level. Let's say you have an Apache, this is all set up, and then you just install, or like you add the WordPress installation in the subdirectory /blog. Like this is like really a simple way to set things up, but probably the most straightforward one.
But with this integrator template, so this provides a header and a footer kind of, and some global styles and so on. So we could work with that, and we wouldn't need to work with an iframe, right? This probably would be the easiest way, just like having a template with an iframe. I'm not sure if we're even going to talk about this because it's so obvious, but it also has obvious disadvantages. But with this integrator template, so the rendering is one part, as you explained, the routing is the other part. When you said like we had to do the rendering on our end and the request hit our server, how did we route that then to make it available under this company domain?
Well, we didn't, basically, the easiest way, as I said, is just to put it in a subdirectory, like to put the entire WordPress installation like in the subdirectory. So we don't do any special routing. We just say, we don't have, like in the index PHP, for example, you could say, okay, you only like load the request, like load this integrator template as a base HTML and then replace the placeholders. Like this has not so much to do with the server structure, right?
Okay. It wasn't like our server, but it was their server then, or this would be their existing server, and then just serving that integrator template with the WordPress installation from within that subdirectory. Okay.
Exactly. But like also with a integrator template, or also with like any other kind of different installation, the more advanced or sophisticated way maybe would be to use a reverse proxy. And this is something that is used more and more frequently, I would say, lately, because this also allows you to have any sort of technology running in the backend, right? And any sort of server. So you might have like a Node.js main application running on the root, and then in /blog you have a WordPress install. And for that, you need to have a reverse proxy in front of like the main domain that will route the request depending on the URL to a specific server. And there are multiple technologies that you can use as a reverse proxy. The most like prominent one is probably Nginx, because a lot of people use that, but honestly, like you can do the same thing with Apache and have like the mod proxy, for example, or like via other means where you can just add like a rewrite rule to an htaccess, say it's a proxy, and then it will actually do the same thing for you. And also, of course, there are other technologies like in Node.js. There are even like hardware reverse proxies and so on. So there's a big playing field of what technologies to use to get a reverse proxy. And the idea is basically, as I said, you have routing rules, right? So you say, okay, if the URL starts with /blog, then I route it to a specific IP or domain or whatever. But it looks in the browser, so it's not a 301 redirect, but it's like a real proxy where you just like put through the request from the client directly via the reverse proxy to the source server. And this also works quite well, but in WordPress you have to take a couple of, or there are different strategies of how to achieve that with WordPress, right? Yeah.
So the main difference is like that you cannot just like route to a URL in the same server, but just like route URLs to entirely different servers. And then you can host your WordPress website on one server and keep that infrastructure there, and then have that totally separate from the infrastructure of, let's say, an e-commerce shop system, SaaS platform, or whatsoever, although the domains look like as if it was all on one server.
Yeah.
What kind of challenges are there with that you just addressed, or how do you solve them?
Well, There are a couple of things, especially with WordPress, that might be a bit challenging. Like the first thing is, like in WordPress, you usually have a like home URL or site URL where you define what URL you can access the WordPress instance on, right? So and every request to like another domain that hits this server or to another URL will actually redirect to the set site URL or home URL. So and in that case, this is a bit strange because you have you say you route in the reverse proxy, you configure it to route the request to some other IP or domain or whatever. So this is actually where WordPress needs to be available, but then it also needs to kind of think that it is served from like the original URL, right? And there are two ways to do that. Either you tell WordPress that it's actually hosted at the URL that the client enters, and then however you can only access WordPress through this URL. Or you say, no, I install WordPress on a different, or I run it on a different URL or domain, and then I have the reverse proxy basically rewrite the content as well. So you just look for the URLs that are like the original like URLs, and then you replace them with like something else. Like with Apache, you can use like the mod substitute, for example, and with Nginx, there is also ways to do that. This, however, also has some issues from time to time, because what do you rewrite, right? So is it only HTML? Is it also JavaScript and CSS? Because there might be URLs in there. So it like this can get a bit tricky as well. And in general, it also depends on how you want the content in the end to be integrated, right? If it's only a /blog and everything under /blog gets just passed through the WordPress server, you might take a different approach than if you also want to, for example, have landing pages or like the static pages, the about us, the imprint and things like that. If you want to have that also in the WordPress blog, then it again gets more complicated, because you not only need to route one directory, but also maybe like different single pages. Then you also cannot forget about WP content, like all of the static files that exist in a WordPress installation, images, uploads, and so on. So there's quite a bit to keep in mind and to test. And I think in a lot of cases there is not really a out-of-the-box solution for WordPress, so you might have to hack around a little bit in order to get things working for your specific use case perfectly. So that's basically then everything more or less about a reverse proxy. Again, multiple technologies can be used for that, and it's probably the most flexible way of doing things. But again, this is like the technical or the server side stuff on how to integrate. But this doesn't really affect on what kind of integration you choose, right? So we talked about the integrator template before. What's another way that you could try to mimic another website, Steffen?
Well, you could simply rebuild it, as weird as that sounds, but we're doing that here and there again in terms of rebuilding the header and the footer of the website, but in a stripped down version, so that it would look like the main navigation of the main website, that the logo is in the right position, the sizing works and so on, but you wouldn't have all the same functionality. Like you wouldn't have the same mega menu drop downs or a card, but maybe only have like a search input field. And when you type into it and you submit it, then you get search results maybe on the main website, which is again including the search results from the magazine. That's what we've done recently. Or you have a call to action to go to the shop from there and so on. And while this sure sounds like a compromise that you don't get the full experience, it also solves a lot of problems in terms of compatibility. Like you don't have to rebuild that whole functionality. You don't have to keep it in sync. You are not getting into each other's way in terms of developers working on the blog or landing page versus the developers working on the main app. But everyone can work in their domain. And here and there, you might need to sync some things again or update some things maybe twice. But that still works usually very fine, can be solved independently. We have done that a couple of times before. I'm not sure. I feel like we sometimes also did it kind of with an in-between approach, that we had an API which was serving us kind of like in a JSON request the menu items, and we would integrate them still. So the main CMS or shop could provide us with a list of menu items.
Yeah, exactly. So that's basically, that's like the downside of when you rebuild something completely and you want it to look exactly the same, right? Like a footer menu or a main menu, main navigation. That if you want to change something, that you need to change it in two systems, right? So as a content editor later. And this is also where APIs are helpful. So an API from the main app could or main site could provide the content for the menus, or even provide the entire component, right? So that's like a nice thing. And we haven't done this in production yet, but there is something called module federation, where you could say, okay, this server just provides us custom elements and then, or web components, like real web components with a shadow DOM and so on, right? Where you have the styles encapsulated, where you have the functionality encapsulated. And this is like the ultimate solution, I would say, to a lot of the things. If the main app provided like these components for header, footer, and whatnot. Of course, you could also go the other way around and say you provide these components for content modules, but this is usually not really what you want, right? Also, in terms of like Shadow DOM and so on, I think it's not really 100% crawlable yet. Then you'd have to do like server-side rendering, like declarative Shadow DOM, which is just like still an experimental technology and so on. So this is like probably the future of things. So where you talked about iframes before, right? Iframes were probably like the initial way of how you would achieve that. Then you go via integrator templates or reverse proxies to a way. I mean, reverse proxies will still be used in the future because it's like this is about routing the requests to the right server. But content-wise, I think these federated modules or like just web components provided via some API are probably the future where things are going, right?
Yeah, that sounds really cool. That would be very great if that will be possible. Well, certainly it is. Just someone needs to do it and build it. And that usually also some extra effort to maintain it. Also gets more complicated when there's additional functionality to interact, like with a card, where then the magazine and the card within the header should interact and provide an API and so on. But I would be happy to try that.
Yeah. Yeah, and the problem is a lot of the times that these sites that you want to integrate with are mostly the legacy websites, right? So these are a little more legacy than what we develop. So otherwise, it's definitely a nice way of structuring new projects, at least considering the possibility, like if you know already, but you rarely know that, if you know already that you might want to integrate other websites, or if you know you're like creating a website for an app, for a web app, and you also want to integrate WordPress into it as a blog or for the marketing pages or landing pages or whatever, then it might be a good thing to think about this beforehand and start with, like, again, also like design systems. You can have design systems as shared packages, as like also in a module sort of sense, and then also think about web components that provide entire functionality as like blocks that you can just insert in other websites as well.
Okay, cool. Other approaches. What just came to my mind is the content-only approach.
Yes.
Thinking about this, we have with Flint, we use sometimes the other way around. Like we have a template that works with a get parameter that we like to call content only. And when you add that get parameter to a URL, then you could render this, or this URL would render the content without the header and the footer actually. So the other way around, when we have a website, maybe we have an existing website already, and we want to have two different versions. One we want to have like its own website or landing pages, but maybe the blog section or a certain section of that website should be integrated to another website. And then we can provide that URL. This also helps for some, like doing some Ajax results, pre-rendered results, and so on. But I also remember that once for a startup we did it kind of like that. I am not sure if they then took our content-only template and actually just implemented within an iframe, or if they did it a more sophisticated way and then fetched this additional CSS that we were serving in JavaScript.
Yeah, so in general, this integrator template approach can also work the other way around, right? So that it's not the WordPress server that fetches the integrator template and then replaces the content, but it could be that you do that that you have an existing website, and then somebody needs to implement this functionality, of course, in this website, that this fetches a URL and just replaces a placeholder inside of their template with the content that you fetch, right? But it gets a little bit more complicated kind of this way, because you need a routing that the application needs to do, like the original root application. And a lot of the times in our content only templates, we don't include scripts or styles, right? So because we have our JavaScript that dynamically loads these kind of things if needed. So you would have to implement some kind of functionality for that as well. Also putting link tags inside of the body is not valid HTML. I mean, you can do it and it works in all browsers, but the behavior in every browser is slightly different, as far as I know.
All right, yeah, we could like serve more like blank HTML also, and then leave the styling to the application. It doesn't make sense for like complex sites, but maybe for like easily integrating content in real time into a website. That should be pre-rendered. But also other times we then provide rather like an API, so either directly a REST API or just like provide per route its own JSON file with the rendered fields or with the fields that are added to the backend and the components and so on. That's one way we did once, I think, at least, to provide a chatbot with results, real-time results from the website, which was heavily updated on a live event, and then the chatbot could also consume the content from the website.
Yeah. That's like exactly one thing. Like you could, with Flint, very easily just let the content editors edit the content, right? And then instead of calling the URL, you add a .json or a question mark format equals JSON. And then you could get like the raw fields, like not even formatted HTML, only in the case of rich text or Wysiwyg editors, but you could have like structured data. Like I think when we talked about a headless WordPress and so on, like this is also like a different way where you don't have to have like an extra API, like use WP JSON or WP GraphQL or something, but you could just use the routes WordPress already provides and just say, I want this in JSON.
Yeah. This can make it very easy to integrate an approach, right? Without having to build up the whole querying and data structure again, but like rely on the pre-rendered stuff that is there already. And that's like where things start to get also a bit more tricky, because sometimes you might have a project where you want to combine multiple approaches. Let's say you have a e-commerce shop, and there you want to have like a separate magazine which is hosted on a separate server and then integrated with a reverse proxy under /blog or magazine. But then maybe you also want to have search results from that blog pop up in the main website search, like in the e-commerce shop. And then we need to provide at the same time a JSON API with query results to the shop, so it can integrate just like the data and style that themselves in the search results, or additionally provide them with the feed of news for the homepage. But then again, you might want to allow the editors of the magazine to prioritize which things should come first on the website. So you kind of like, provide a prioritized feed for the integration of the website, and then share and exchange data through multiple ways within one website, one installation. What I think always is crucial is to ensure that you find a way that makes clear whose responsibility something is, kind of. Who's responsible for integrating the stuff, and how can you make it clear that things aren't overlapping too much? Because once things start overlapping, like you code something and you leave the implementation to someone else, but you both share, like have a shared CSS base, then what if something doesn't look right? Who's responsible to fix that? On which end? And the more you like separate things in terms of data and styling and make it clear that it's only one party's responsibility for a certain domain or integration, then it's a lot easier than having to collaborate with other teams and developer teams on the integration part.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, these projects can get quite complex and difficult to handle. Also, like the reverse proxy setup. So there can be issues on both sides, right? Configuring the reverse proxy correctly, and then also taking that or serving the data correctly in WordPress. And communication is key in these kind of situations. Also regarding like when you combine technologies and when you have an interdependence, it's good to evaluate like what kind of choices there are, right? Because for example, for search, it could be that the main application has like one search and WordPress has another search, and then how do you combine search results and so on? And you have to provide we have to provide a JSON API or some sort of API, and they have to provide an API for us. So sometimes it's then easier to externalize this as well. Use even a different, like an additional technology, make things even more complex, right? And say you have like the most common name is always Elasticsearch for that, where both servers just feed the same search service and can also query that. Then like this would introduce new complexity in order to reduce it at like some other place. So it's always like a a lot of things to consider. And yeah, but it's great to have these opportunities or possibilities. And yeah, if you have a complex setup and like a good IT infrastructure, then using reverse proxies, search services, maybe an aggregated feed, like you write your own like microservice that just aggregates feeds from different sources and then just spits them out to consume again, to be consumed by the same sources. So yeah, this can get complicated, and it's but some setups are a bit more involved, right? And it always depends on what your goal is, how many teams are involved, how the content is edited, where you get the content from, and yeah, that's why there are experts that work with WordPress that have seen bigger projects and that don't know everything, of course, but at least we'll always find a solution or have like good approaches to find the right solution that gets the job done and makes everyone involved happy.
Is there anything else that we haven't covered yet?
I don't know. Nothing comes to my mind. I think we're good.
Good.
Then thanks for listening.
Yes.
And if you have complex projects that you encountered in the past and where you maybe went too complex or had this super idea to keep things simple, please leave a comment and yeah, let's chat.